Kevin Franke is a man who has been portrayed as a victim of circumstance, a father blindsided by the horrors uncovered in his own family. If you aren't familiar or need a bit of a refresher, Ruby Franke is the defamed vlogger mom who partnered up with the corrupt therapist Jodi Hildebrandt. They were caught torturing Ruby's children. They are now both in prison after pleading guilty to multiple felonies. By now, everyone agrees that Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt are monsters, figures who orchestrated unimaginable abuse under the guise of parenting and therapy. Their guilt is undeniable. But Kevin Franke, his story is murky. How does he explain his family's dramatic unraveling? This video is about the deceptive innocence of Kevin Franke. My channel is supported by you. My last video on this topic was demonetized about a day after it went live because of controversial issues. Special shout out to Turner, Etmix, Oliver, and Jonathan W. You are absolute legends over on Patreon. You can join the Patreon for as little as $1. Help me get to 100 patrons so we can launch the private Discord. When I last covered the Franke family, we didn't have as much information as we do today. We now have access to police interviews, crime scene photos, jail phone calls, Ruby's journals, and a series of public statements from Kevin and his lawyer. It's speculated that Kevin may be very close to securing guardianship of the 4 youngest children, and we now have evidence that the older children have also spent significant time with him recently. One of the family's most outspoken critics is Shari, the eldest daughter of the Franke family. She had reported her siblings to Child Protective Services long before Ruby's arrest. Shari has remained vocal against YouTube family vloggers, both on Instagram and to lawmakers. And she recently announced a forthcoming book titled The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom, set to be released in January. You can order it now. I have the Amazon links below, and I'm planning on reviewing the book, so stay tuned for that. And Shari, if you catch wind of this video, I would love to get an early copy to review. But another question many of us want answered is, will Shari side with her father against Ruby, or will she hold Kevin complicit in the family's downfall? She titled her book House of My Mother, not House of My Parents, so we probably have our answer there. But I'll get back to you on that. From what I recall from their vlogs from many years ago, Shari always seemed to get along well with her dad, and even if he made some mistakes, their relationship is salvageable. The mainstream narrative that has been popular since the time of Ruby's arrest is that Kevin was just as surprised as authorities when they discovered his children emaciated and tortured in Jodi's home. And besides, the youngest children, who we'll call R and E, were at Jodi's house, not Ruby's, at the time of the arrest. We had a vague description of their physical appearances. We knew that they were taken to the hospital, but it was hard to know how bad their condition was. People naturally assumed Ruby was involved, but some speculated she might have been a secondary player, possibly victim to Jodi's influence, standing by as the abuse occurred. Since it was Jodi's idea to separate Kevin and Ruby, and Jodi was home with the children when the authorities searched the house, questions lingered about who was primarily responsible for the abuse. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the timeline of events as we know them from the perspective of Kevin. I'll attempt to understand his actions and decisions within the context of his faith as a devout Mormon, but at the same time, we'll look for signs of deception. I want to answer the question, is Kevin Franke an innocent victim who loves his children, or a calculating, spineless father? In 2015, Ruby starts the 8-passenger YouTube channel. Kevin works at BYU as an associate professor in civil and construction engineering. In one of Ruby's early vlogs, she celebrates with Kevin when he achieves what they refer to as tenure.
University president sent me a letter. I am tenured.
However, we know now that BYU doesn't grant tenure in the traditional sense, but instead offers continuing faculty status, eliminating the need to renew contracts each semester. Unlike tenure, Kevin's new status was granted based on alignment with the university's religious and mission values, making it a significant achievement. For a Mormon academic, securing a position as a professor at BYU is often seen as the ultimate career goal.
Daddy is a tenured professor. which means he's gonna have a job
Forever.
forever
And ever.
and ever.
And ever.
We will always have money to put food on the table. We will always have money to buy orange jumpsuits.
Watching this now feels grim. Kevin would go on to lose his position at BYU, and Ruby would end up in a prison jumpsuit. You can find plenty of negative reviews for Kevin on ratemyprofessor.com, though some question the legitimacy of these critiques, even though many reviews date back to well before the controversy surrounding the Franke family. Additionally, I found a few unverified Reddit posts from grad students discussing his performance as a professor. Despite mixed feedback from online review websites, Kevin is generally regarded as a respected professor at BYU. In Kevin's second police interview after the arrest, available only in audio format, he states that Ruby began speaking with Jody in 2018.
Ruby started to speak with Jody towards the end of 2018, early 2019, with the intention of having her be the therapist.
I'm about as curious as you are about what Kevin said next, but the authorities redacted it. Kevin recalls attending a conference with Jody in the summer of 2019, describing his impression as,
This is absolute craziness. This is a bunch of man-hating women that are just looking for excuses to tear down their husbands. And I mean, that's what it felt like to me when I was in there.
In January of 2020, he joined a men's group at Jody's recommendation, but left after 3 months, feeling it wasn't the right fit for him. Jody labeled Kevin a sex addict for occasionally masturbating and viewing pornography in the past. Despite mainstream psychology recognizing masturbation as normal and studies showing that up to like 90% of men have viewed pornography or admit to it in surveys, Jody, armed with the church doctrine, had the power to label almost any man in the Mormon church as a sexual deviant. It's important to realize that in the Mormon church, sexual misconduct is regarded as a moral transgression second to murder. In February of 2020, Connections was announced on Instagram. The pressure on the Franke family's 8-passenger channel reached a boiling point in May of 2020. The infamous Chad situation we've all heard about led to an outpouring of criticism over Ruby's parenting and the exploitation of her children. People had been criticizing Ruby for years, but it would start to go mainstream in 2020. The video Ruby posted, where she almost rejoiced over telling her audience that her son, Chad, had been sleeping on a beanbag for months, started to get picked up by bigger publications like Business Insider.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October.
In the police interview, Kevin claims this backlash caused a massive loss of income.
In May of 2020, some videos that Ruby released on that dealt with Chad just blew up in her face, and it was all over the news, and hundreds of thousands of TikTokers and all this stuff were just piling on and basically burned down like our YouTube channel. And overnight, like the income went, we lost 90% of the income overnight, and that was hard.
Was this like which episode was this? Is this the one where they talked about like the beanbag or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they started going back and trying to dig and find, and then they'd find these little nuggets like, oh, look, Eve went to school without a lunch one day, or stuff like that. But it was the beanbag video that really set people off.
According to Kevin, Jody was at fault for this. There are numerous videos that depict Kevin drinking the Connections Kool-Aid right from the very beginning.
Kevin and I have decided that we are going to give the gift of truth to them this year for Christmas. We are going to give them the gift of boundaries, and we're going to give them the gift of repentance. And we told them that this year they are not going to be visited by Santa.
For a long time, I viewed sex as a critical part of a marriage.
And so we see that Kevin is not only allowing this to take place, he's actively involved. And to this day, the Connections Instagram is still up. You can go through and find Kevin telling you all of his enlightened knowledge. Kevin's face appears almost as much as Jody and Ruby in the content released by Connections during this time. Ruby embraces this harmful philosophy and proclaims her enlightenment with the zeal of an annoying mid-level marketing mom on Facebook.
So we have this idea that controlling parents are parents who make their kids do something that the kids don't want to do. Did you know that a controlling parent is also a parent who doesn't expect anything from their children and allows the child to do whatever they want? That's also a controlling parent. Being a parent is a position of power. You have a responsibility and you have an obligation and a duty to show up being wise, being a guide, being an instructor for your child. And your children are showing up saying, I won't do that. No, I don't want to. If you're in a position of power and you turn your power and give it over to the kids, that is control.
And you can see how toxic this thinking is. Ruby isn't controlling. Her children chose not to eat. They chose to be tied up in a basement. You can go through the Connections Instagram right now and see everyone dunking on her after her arrest. Even your face tells you're rotten inside. Stop the madness. They spiritualize and moralize normal behavior. For example, resisting bedtime is a tactic of deception. Swearing and cursing isn't just inappropriate, it's specifically to disrespect the mother. Jody eventually moves in with the Frankes. Kevin describes what it was like when Jody first moved in with them, sounding more like a hokey Mormon conspiracy theorist than a scientist.
The moment she showed up in my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and then stuff floating around, and it was weird, and I hated it. And I became the resident exorcist. That was the title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of funny, but it was my job to go and give her lessons whenever she started to go into a trance and go into possession, and which started to be a lot. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started every 4 hours at night, and then it moved every 2 hours at night, then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there. And if I need you, I'll come down and get you. I'm that's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed.
What's even more alarming is Kevin claims Ruby, Pam Botcher, and Jody would spend 4 hours locked in a room together and come out ecstatic about changing the world. We'd find out later that Pam Botcher was a leader in Connections, and it was her house where the two middle children were found doing manual labor at the time of Ruby and Jody's arrest. We also find out that Chad was paying $900 a month to Jody for his therapy.
So at age 17, he was paying her $900 a month to get brainwashed.
Dad at 17?
He did.
What was he doing for work?
He worked at a lifeguard, basically.
Okay.
Lifeguard supervisor at two different rec centers.
Yeah.
So it was the majority of his check was going to Jody.
He was paying her more than he was paying rent, wasn't he?
So 3 times as much.
While Jody owned a multi-million-dollar house with her income as a therapist. Kevin talks about his dispute over the 8-passenger channel with Ruby. She wants to sign over the channel to Jody. Ruby's YouTube manager tells her that Jody is setting off multiple red flags.
Our YouTube manager at the time was red flags. I don't know how to tell you. She is scamming you. Ruby fired him. And I was I believe our manager. I think he's right. And Ruby started threatening me with another separation. And just this isn't about money. This is about doing God's work.
Ruby then demands an in-home separation from Kevin at the direction of Jody. Shari, the eldest daughter and student at BYU, cuts ties with the family. In April of 22, police were called to Ruby Franke's neighborhood. A DCFS worker, which is like their state's CPS, reported 2 young kids running around in the road unsupervised. A law enforcement officer drove through the area but didn't see the kids in the street and left. In September of 22, a neighbor said she and others in the community had tried to get authorities to intervene for at least a year. The neighbor said she and others in the neighborhood asked the Utah Division of Child and Family Services to intervene multiple times. The article says that after her report, the neighbor saw authorities making a wellness check. However, no one answered the door for the officers. And at some point, the officers just left. Kevin admits to intentionally ignoring their phone calls.
DCFS was trying to contact me repeatedly, but again, I was being indoctrinated just as much by Jody as Ruby was. And I was being coached the same way. They want to rip your family apart. They want to destroy your family. This is what government does, she would say. And so I didn't answer the phone.
On September 18th of 22, Ruby Franke's eldest daughter, Shari Franke, requested a welfare check. She told police that her sisters and brother had been left home alone for 5 days while their mother visited a friend in St. George. October 5th, 22, a caseworker said she had been to the Franke residence several times to try to make contact with the kids, but neither Ruby Franke nor the children would answer the door or pick up the phone. In a December update, police said a warrant for the caseworker to speak with the children was not approved. Kevin's employment at BYU ended in the spring of 23. Kevin talks about a trip that Ruby and Jody go on to buy drugs for their emergency kits.
She went on a trip with Jody and Pam down to Arizona. And I think they, like, when I read her journal, she went into Mexico or something and bought drugs or something, like prescription drugs for the emergency kits. And when she came back from that trip, before she even brought the bags into the house, she pulled me in and said, I want to talk with you. And that's when she asked me to leave.
People have speculated that they might have bought sedatives that they used on the children. Ruby meets with Kevin to have him sign over the titles to the vehicles, and he agrees to sign over something else in addition for an investment. He doesn't know what it is.
She was like, I might want to do an investment, but I will need your signature. Do you trust me enough that I could get your signature if I wanted to pursue my own investment? Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
He never does. He speculates that he thinks it might have been the mortgage or the house. And just to help you understand where Kevin's headspace is right now, you have to understand that Jody was a recommended and approved therapist within the Mormon church, giving her a significant influence. She had Kevin in a vulnerable position. His marriage, employment, and all of his social capital were tied to his standing as a good Mormon. It's clear he was willing to go to great lengths to comply and maintain his reputation. There's a lot to unpack here, but multiple sources have come forward stating that Jody had a pattern of reporting her therapy clients to BYU and the Mormon Church. It was discovered in 2012. Jody had her license suspended for discussing a patient without his permission with the LDS church leaders and Brigham Young University. This was her MO. She separated married couples who, by any reasonable standard, were normal and functional. There are now lots of news stories and websites that catalog all of the bad experiences people have had with Jody. At this point, Ruby had taken control of everything. She emptied the family's bank accounts and stashed $85,000 in cash in a bag at Jody's house. The police discovered this during their warrant search. Kevin didn't actually know the specifics of all of this at the time, but Ruby later would confirm it in a phone call with Kevin following her arrest.
So I pulled the money and I have it in a bag. And
With you? Do the police have it?
well, I don't know what the police took. I don't know what the police have.
But the bag was at Jody's house?
They can't just take people's money. I mean, that's not right.
Well, they're not going to take the money, but when they have a search warrant, they have access to everything in the house.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to need that money.
It surprised me, and I think it surprised everyone, how Kevin describes Jody during this time.
She always covered herself.
Yeah.
Like even in the hottest of summer, she would wear these hoodies. She would smell so bad.
Yeah.
She would never bathe, but she was trying to hide her arms and stuff because apparently Ruby told me they were just like mutilated.
Kevin describes another wild situation where Jody had gotten wrapped up in what appears to be a cult with the Hannah family.
According to Jody, she was held against her will for 6 weeks and was kidnapped, and she escaped and got out. According to the Hannahs, after 6 weeks of Jody stabbing herself with forks and knives, cutting herself, and wanting to commit suicide and trying to seduce the husband of the family, they kicked her out.
On August 2nd, 2023, people noticed the 8-passenger channel was deleted by Ruby. Fast forward to late August of 23. R escapes Jody's compound, and after knocking on 3 neighbors' houses, a man finally answered. And to my knowledge, no one has put this together, but it's clear now that R wasn't trying to necessarily seek help. He wasn't even intending to be rescued. He was trying to turn himself into police. And I know this doesn't make much sense, but we now have the security footage from the homeowner's cameras. R tells the homeowner he wants to be taken to the police station. The man asks why. He says it's personal business. And when I first heard this, I thought, oh, he fears Jody and his mom, and he doesn't want to get in trouble. And that may be true, but it's actually even worse.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
After reviewing Ruby's journals, and yes, she kept journals documenting all of the abuse, she recalls a time where R had escaped to go to jail. Ruby prefaces the journal entry proclaiming that this was a situation where God gave her a miracle that she will never forget. Ruby woke up in the middle of the night and noticed R was gone. He left an arrangement of rocks with the message, "Jail, I will call when I get there." She pleads to God to protect me, protect Jody, protect us, as they scramble in their cars to look for R. After finding R, Ruby writes, "The devil wants me in prison, my children dead." She claims the spirit told her, "Don't let these kids' choices ruin your life. We have work to do. You can force repentance." To de-escalate the situation, she tied one end of a rope to R and the other to herself. You see, Ruby had told R that he would be taken to the jail because of how bad he was behaving, but it didn't have the impact she thought it would on him. Ruby writes in her journal, R doesn't actually know what jail means. He has no comprehension what throwing your life away means. He just wants the immediate gratification of sitting in the air-conditioned car ride to juvie. He wants stimulus. In the same month of Ruby's arrest, in the most epic foreshadowing irony that you could imagine, R tells Ruby, "Take me to jail where I belong." R escapes again, but this time he'd actually made contact with the outside world. His condition was so much worse than I had even imagined. The body cam footage revealed a giant safe where they would keep the children, and photos of their injuries were so bad I can't show them to you on YouTube. This is a picture of one of the injuries. The handcuffs have created deep open wounds. Even the responding EMTs and police were overwhelmed with the condition of the children. Jody and Ruby had tried to treat the wounds with cayenne pepper and honey, so it has this weird orangish hue to it. While most children grow out of their clothes, E had lost so much weight, her clothes no longer fit. Ruby had cut her hair off as punishment. If you remember anything from my last video or any other video about E, you would know why Ruby messing with her hair is so disturbing. Of course, the children wanted help. It's just that R thought jail was going to be better than life with his mom. And not only were they correct that jail would have been better, we now know he actually thought he was in serious trouble with the police. When I was looking through the crime scene photos, I initially was confused as to why they took so many photos of this small trampoline. And then I found the part in the journal where Ruby forced R to jump on it barefoot in the hot sun, dehydrating him, burning his feet, and exhausting him, all to accuse him later of stealing water. I won't go into much more detail of the entire journal because this video is about Kevin, but the conditions were horrific. Many professionals agree that R and E were days away from death had they continued to be in Ruby and Jody's care, and I agree. Jody's home is raided, Ruby and Jody are arrested, Jody does the whole Karen behavior.
I have my turn.
That's great. Step out of the house.
No, I'm not going to step out of the house.
Step out of the house. Step out of the house.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
We're just going to see if
anybody else.
Is there anybody else home?
Wait a minute, how do you come to my house?
Right there.
Look, they go into my house.
And Ruby becomes
Do you have a
stone
search
cold,
warrant?
motionless.
Do you have a search warrant?
Have a seat right there.
Are you sure let you know what your criminal charges for, so you're under arrest?
Control 12X, let me over there. We're searching the house.
I can tell you what's in the house.
Okay.
Okay.
Just have a seat right there for
You
me.
understand that or no?
Do you have a search warrant?
We'll explain it after this.
You can't just...
Are you okay? I'm wondering if there's like a medical clearance that needs to, like, do you need medical attention before you go to the jail? Okay. All right, well, we'll have you, as soon as she gets down here, we'll bring you out, okay?
Okay.
Have you ever been arrested before? I'm just concerned about you. I know you don't believe that. But I've had an opportunity to talk to your husband and kind of worried about your circumstances and obviously your children as well. But you're sure you don't need medical attention or anything like that?
We have access to the jail phone calls. First, Ruby speaks with Kevin the next day.
Adults have a really hard time understanding that children can be full of evil and what that takes to fight it. You've seen what it takes to fight evil. It's not the person you're fighting, and it can look like something it's not. And you've been there, you know that.
And we don't know exactly what Ruby's referencing here, but Kevin, knowing the detectives would be listening, doesn't respond to Ruby.
I just received a text from Ted Dawson out of the blue, who I haven't heard from in years.
What, he just texted you?
Yeah, the story's out.
Are we in the news?
It sounds like that at least you're in the news. I don't know about me. I don't know what he's talking about.
This is another example of Kevin having a higher legal IQ than Ruby. On one hand, Kevin says the stories are out and they're in the news, but in the same breath denies he even knows what the story is. They know they are on a recorded line. You can sense the tension around their daughter, Shari.
I'm wondering if they went to Shari to, ask her questions.
I don't know.
These bookings are public.
I know they are. And a couple months ago, Business Insider was reaching out to me, and I ignored their email, but I'm going dark.
This is a witch
I'm not
hunt.
at BYU. I'm not at BYU anymore, so I don't know how they're going to find me.
Kevin does actually press Ruby on the condition of the children. Ruby outright lies to him.
They're going to be in the hospital for 3 days.
So weird. It's just not necessary. Like trying to exaggerate this.
We get another phone call with Kevin. Ruby compares herself to the founder of the Mormon Church.
Joseph Smith, every wonderful man of God has had to be misunderstood.
That's right.
And at no time in any of these conversations will Kevin ask Ruby any tough questions.
Ruby, I'm going to do everything that I can to keep truth in our family. And
Thank you.
I'm committed to our family. I'm committed to you and our marriage, no matter what happens.
Thank you. you.
I will be here to support you in any way that I can.
He's still on her team at this point. I believe that Kevin doesn't have the full picture here. He probably believes the injuries aren't that bad, and he doesn't necessarily have all the facts like we do now. This is the last phone call Kevin has with Ruby. Kevin moves back into the family home. The next day, Kevin claims the house was burglarized and then wants to press charges against his own daughter, Shari.
Now, explain to me again why this was not robbery.
Because it's a civil issue. You guys are family. She's been in the house before. You haven't been in the house in a year. We have to prove intent to deprive you of the items. And that wasn't her intent in having them. So the detective sergeant said that we're not going to charge her for anything.
Okay. I'll have to do some more research on that.
Kevin is quite visibly pouting because his own daughter isn't being arrested. In early September, there is a sealed juvenile hearing. People speculate it's about what the state is going to do with the children. Kevin's lawyer makes a statement.
We're working hard, Kevin and I, to convince the state that he's an incredible father, as he was before all this happened, and they became separated. But in the meantime, he's just working hard on getting himself back in position to be able to take these kids and raise them as a good father would.
As Law and Crime Network reported, shocking allegations came out of a previous juvenile hearing when Ruby Franke appeared virtually. She claimed one of her children started having problems at age 3 when they began looking at pornography. While Franke didn't mention the child by name, she alleged her child sexually assaulted one of their younger siblings, which led to that child sexually assaulting other kids.
This all went down in the juvenile court proceedings. These proceedings were supposed to be private, but a reporter snuck in and divulged the details. Ruby provided no proof of her allegations against her child. The article says the court went eerily silent after Ruby made the disturbing claims. And I will not repeat the specific allegations to protect the child, but I bring this up to make it very clear. After Ruby's arrest, at her hearing, she was still under the illusion that her child is evil and that her behavior was justified.
I think it was very damaging the last time when the reporter snuck into the courtroom and then divulged very, very confidential and information that Mrs. Franke stated about one of their children. And I just think that was damaging to everyone. It was especially damaging to the child.
Kevin's attorney did an interview with Law and Crime in late September, about 1 month after Ruby's arrest. In my opinion, Kevin and his lawyer were furious about Ruby's accusation about one of the children. And this could be why Kevin doesn't have the children today.
He wishes it wouldn't have been published, but in terms, because it's involving his son in a very confidential matter, I shouldn't comment about that. I shouldn't comment about my client's belief about that.
Meanwhile, Kester doubles down, saying he believes the entire Franke family was brainwashed at the hand of Jody Hildebrandt.
It's a very delicate situation. These kids have been horribly, horribly brainwashed, indoctrinated, and it's scary.
Brainwashed by who?
Jody.
Do you believe that Ruby was brainwashed by Jody?
Yes. And I say that because everyone, the focus has been on Kevin. Where was he? Why was he absent? How does that all happen? So he was doing that at Ruby's direction, who I think was being directed by Jody. This is the way that you've got to repair your marriage and repair your family. So they were all sort of kind of being manipulated, and this is just my opinion, by Jody. And I think she knew what she was doing, and it was causing significant damage. And so when Kevin's critics are out there saying, where was he? He was acting at the direction of what he thought was a competent mental health care provider and advisor. And to me, the better question is, what kind of mental health care provider would advise a family and a husband and wife and a husband and or a father and children that this can repair your family if you just stay away from each other?
September 17th, Kevin's attorney does an interview with Law and Crime. Kevin's lawyer gives an explanation for his absence at home.
But he wasn't calling the kids, checking in on the kids, seeing how they're doing. He's the father. I totally understand that. That was the big question on my mind and the big question on a lot of people. If you've read everything that's in the media, he's getting raked over the coals for that. But what people don't understand is that he was trying to preserve his marriage. He was taking direction from her. She's the one who asked him to leave the house and indicating that in order for him to be able to get back together with her and be a family, that she was requesting that he leave the home and that he not contact them or the children. Later told him that everything was blissful at home. It was so much better without him.
October 17th, Kevin is seen with his eldest children, Shari and Chad, leaving the courthouse. August 15th of 23, Kevin is on a live stream with his new consulting job.
Kevin is a recent employee joining HDR as a senior geotechnical engineer. He was recently an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the Brigham Young University.
And it's at this point that we start to see a major shift in Kevin's thinking. Kevin played nice with Ruby initially, likely to avoid implicating himself. I think the juvenile hearing where Ruby went after her son in court publicly, potentially preventing him from being housed with his siblings, was the final straw for Kevin. It was at this point moving forward that he would allow himself to turn against Ruby. On November 30th, 23, Kevin files for divorce. A temporary injunction is automatically implemented, which is standard in Utah, and it prevents either party from bad-mouthing the other. However, the injunction does not prevent either party from testifying in court. December 1st, we get another interview with Kevin's lawyer.
Once he found out the full truth about how these children had been treated while they were in Ruby's care and some other things that have been going on behind the scenes, his gut reaction was he wanted an immediate divorce.
And this interview alone is almost 2 hours, so we're just going to take a quick minute to go over the most important details that Kevin's lawyer touches on.
The way that Ruby's treated the kids and treated the marriage and treated Kevin certainly at the very least constitutes irreconcilable differences. That wouldn't foster a marriage in anyone's life. So we just filed it under the generic term of irreconcilable differences, in that they certainly have differences of opinion about how to raise their kids and some other issues.
And we get some clarity about the disparagement clause that is in effect due to the ongoing divorce proceedings.
His wife is locked up, and she's for very serious allegations. I mean, how does he plan to not talk bad about her during the course of this?
You hit right on it. You can't do that in the presence of the children. You can have all the dialogue you want, adverse dialogue you want between one another, maybe even in public, but you can't say any of those things in the presence of the children or in a venue that you have absolute knowledge that they're going to access. It's just a preservation. Kids, no matter what the circumstance, it seems like kids are resilient and sustain that love for their parents, for both of them. And I think the literature supports the proposition that whenever you tear down a parent in front of a child, it takes a piece of that kid away because they're bonded to their parents. Yeah. So that's the purpose of that order.
What about Shari and Chad?
They're getting along great with their dad. They've spent a lot of time together. They were all together actually over the Thanksgiving holiday, and spent some time together as a family, and Shari and Chad are in constant contact with Kevin.
That's not
probably
that's good
daily.
It's easy to miss what Kevin's lawyer says here, but he stated they are talking probably daily, which is surprising for sure.
That's good
daily.
Because that's good to hear, because we did see reporting that there was tension between Shari and Kevin with respect to her coming to the house. He was curious if or not a police report could have been filed against her, criminal charges been filed against her for coming into the home. So how did they work through their differences?
Just by discussing with adults to one another, father to daughter, and they worked through all that. A lot of it was circumstantial. There were tensions and feelings were running pretty hot after that arrest of Ruby and finding out how their children had been treated in Ruby's custody. I think even the older children were upset about that. Kevin was certainly upset about it, and tensions were just running pretty high. There was some finger pointing going on, and but they've resolved all that. Kevin was particularly upset that the front door of his home had been kicked in and things had been gone through, and the house was a mess. And he'd even been told that third parties who weren't even family members had been able to get into that house and take things or rifle through things or just walk through. And so when he found out some of his personal electronic materials had been taken,
right,
he was upset with Shari. But they've resolved all that. They're best friends now.
Ruby has a phone call with an unidentified man.
I believe that God has a hand in the old Ruby, being kind of.
The recording just starts with this man rambling. I can't really make sense of anything he's saying, but Ruby does let us know where her headspace is. Her arrest is now a miracle.
This has been the strangest and the most miraculous intervention. It put everybody where they needed to be.
And on December 18th of 23, Ruby agrees to not only plead guilty to 4 charges, but she agrees to testify against Jody.
Ms. Franke, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
She addresses the court, and she at least says the right words and admits that what she did was wrong.
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
On December 27th, Jody also pleads guilty. When she addresses the court, she admits no guilt.
I sincerely love these children. I desire for them to heal physically and emotionally. One of the reasons I did not go to trial is that I did not want them to emotionally relive the experience which would have been detrimental to them.
Oh, how nice of her to plead guilty to save the children from trauma.
My hope and prayer is that they will heal and move forward to have beautiful lives. I am willing to submit to what the state feels would be an appropriate amount of time served to make retribution as an outcome.
And we get our final phone call with Ruby.
Did you see that Jody pled guilty today?
I did see that. Yes. Is that a relief for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big relief.
This is a 19-minute conversation with her younger sister, Julie. It takes place on December 28th, 4 months after Ruby's arrest.
Had she not pled guilty, there's enough evidence that she could have been convicted for life.
Ruby is implying here that the evidence was more damning for Jody, when in fact Ruby's journals say otherwise. The conversation continues, but it feels more like an interview.
So do you and her get the same outcome no matter what now, or is there a chance that it would be different?
That's a really good question. That's one that I've asked Lamar. No, we can still have different outcomes.
Ruby is convinced she's taken more accountability than Jody.
Because they're looking how repentant are you? How much responsibility are you taking? How are you aware that what you've done is wrong? And the only reason she pled is because she didn't want to do life. She knew I would testify.
Julie asks several questions about everything going on, and then Ruby gives Julie her account of the day of her arrest.
It looked like the movies. There was a red fire truck. There was a black van with tinted windows. There were 2 ambulances. There were 20 cop cars.
Being the ever-helpful older sister, Ruby offers her sage advice to her younger sibling.
And I'm glad I didn't say anything, because, if you ever get arrested, don't say anything. I just didn't say anything.
And listen, while exercising your right to avoid self-incrimination is generally smart, giving tips on handling an arrest for a child assault, especially to your sister, who happens to be a mommy vlogger, is bizarre. They talk a bit more and listen to how Ruby minimizes being caught red-handed.
Kevin said, here's your attorney, and this is her attorney. And that was the last time I talked to Kevin. It was a couple of days after my arrest. But So I didn't see Jody at all when I went to the house to turn myself in. I didn't see her.
Okay.
Did you catch that? She tells Julie she turned herself in. Turning yourself in is when you go to the cops, not when they raid your house that you were living in. Ruby was caught red-handed and gaslights her sister into thinking it was anything but that. Ruby's journal even explicitly stated that if R ever got out again, she'd be in prison for what she did. And she was right. Later in the conversation, Ruby makes an analogy that unlike Jody, she was just naive, like a child who pees their pants.
It's like a little kid who doesn't know it's wrong to pee in their underwear. Like, they don't know. They're not embarrassed by it. It's like, oh, I was supposed to pee in the toilet? Oh, oops.
And just a quick side note, Ruby complains about R's incontinence all throughout the journals. There are several possible explanations. First, it's common to experience diarrhea when you're starving. Secondly, regression is a typical response to extreme trauma. And finally, perhaps it was R's way of getting back at Ruby. And I hope it was primarily the last reason.
And that's when I realized she knew all along. And she's hiding it. And then I was like, crap, what am I on? And that's when things kind of started turning. I was like, she's not been honest. I didn't know she wasn't honest. I didn't know she would lie. And it's like, what else has she been lying about? Where else have I been deceived?
First, it's alarming that she would use this analogy after she wrote about how R was incontinent during his torture and starvation. But just imagine thinking anyone could be so naive to think that torturing children is something you have to learn not to do, like a child who is potty training.
You have 1 minute remaining for this call.
Do you want to end the call, or do you want me to call you back? How do you want to?
We can end for today, and then we can always talk again. So.
Yeah.
Julie decides to end the call, and while I'm dubiously speculating here, it seems like she's realizing Ruby is even more unhinged than she had initially thought. Throughout the call, Julie comes off as utterly disinterested. Julie is a trained nurse, and this feels more like she's interviewing a patient on the tail end of a 14-hour shift, clinically gathering information before a handoff.
It was good to talk to you.
You have exceeded the allowable time for this call. Goodbye.
Ruby and Jody will remain in jail at least until their parole hearing, currently scheduled for December of 2026. On February 9th, 24, Kevin files for guardianship of the 4 youngest children. On March 24th, the photo, video, and audio evidence drops to the public. And on March 27th, the lead prosecutor does an interview where he sees Ruby as a religious acolyte and Jody as the leader.
In my mind, I see Ruby as a religious acolyte, like a blind follower of Jody. And I don't think, like initially we were like, what is this relationship? Is there more there than a business or a friendship? I don't think there was, right? I think that this is two people where Jody is saying, hey, I had a dream last night from God, and this is what we need to do today, or this is what we need to do we need to move, we need to discipline these kids, whatever it is. And Ruby was to a point in her life that she had separated herself from her husband, her extended family, her adult children. Like, she was just completely isolated. And so it was her minor children, and Jody were basically her contacts. And so that's kind of how I see that relationship having, and I fully believe like that's how that relationship worked, is Ruby was just waiting for Jody to tell her what Jody was thinking or feeling on any given day, and then willing to go forward and do that.
In April of 24, Kevin Franke sues Jody Hildebrandt. What for, you might ask? Emotional distress. And despite only targeting Jody and not Ruby, lawyers have noted that Jody could argue Ruby is an indispensable party, also responsible for the claims in the civil case. Therefore, Kevin's lawsuit against Jody could pull Ruby into it, even though he doesn't explicitly target her in the suit. July 9th, 24, Kevin does an interview with local news. When asked who is more culpable, Jody or Ruby, he says,
I will say this, that if it was not for Jody Hildebrandt, this would not have happened.
Kevin was meeting with Utah lawmakers, and he quite pompously outlines 3 simple ways Ruby and Jody got away with their abuse.
All they had to do were 3 things. 1, keep the children isolated from the world. 2, ignore all the phone calls from DCFS caseworkers. And 3, not answer the door when DCFS and or police officers knocked. That's it.
If I was there, I'd love to add a few more requirements for Jody and Ruby to hide their abuse, such as a cowardly father who abandons his family when they need him most. And what else? Oh yeah, a psycho mom willing to torture her own children.
And protect our children so that what happened to my family cannot happen to anyone else.
And while, like all government programs, I bet there is a lot that can be improved in Utah, but Kevin acts like what happened to him is a problem the government needs to solve. Any normal parent listening to this isn't worried torture at the hands of their spouse would go unnoticed. October 10th, Kevin takes an interview after a committee hearing.
A major issue that we don't talk a lot about, but I think we need to, is how much power the judges in the juvenile court have over this entire process. They're 3 steps removed from the child as opposed to individuals like teachers, neighbors, friends, ecclesiastical leaders who are only 1 step removed from the child. And those individuals know best when something is wrong.
Do I even need to point out how absurdly hypocritical Kevin's statement is here? And that's about where we are currently. R and E were quite literally on the brink of death at the hands of their mother. We know now that Jody was actively selling the Utah home and securing land in Arizona to continue their torture elsewhere. Nothing in Ruby's journal suggests she intended to stop or that her abuse of R and E wouldn't escalate further. When Kevin went to the police station to get his kids and he was informed that the children were abused, he didn't ask how they were doing. In the first interview, the detectives tell him about his emaciated son and the 911 call. They leave the room for a bit. And when they get back, Kevin says this.
What's going to happen to my wife? I love my wife.
I don't know. I'm being honest with you. I don't know. Haven't had an interview with you.
I don't know if those charges against my wife.
Possibly. I think given the circumstances, that's highly appropriate, but again, I don't know your wife. I was hoping to gain some insight from you, but I don't necessarily know that that's something you wanted to...
I trust her.
A road you wanted to travel down with me, so...
And not without legal representation.
Yeah, alright, I get it.
But I love my wife, and I trust my wife.
He doesn't ask about E or R or any of his kids. He was concerned with only Ruby. Many people have pointed this out. It's alarming. Jody was the reason he didn't see his children. Jody was why he never made a single phone call to them for over a year. Jody was the reason he ignored phone calls from Child Protective Services. Jody was the reason he didn't listen to his daughter, Shari. As soon as he realized his daughter had taken a few things from the family home, he wanted her arrested on the spot. But it takes him more than a year after Ruby's arrest to file for divorce, which is like calling the fire department a week after your house burns down. And Kevin has no problem going full Karen in the past. Here he is standing in front of the school board complaining about the atrocities of TikTok dances at their school.
My name is Dr. Kevin Franke. I'm a professor of civil engineering at BYU. I'm a proud father of 6 wonderful children. That the entire curriculum for the class was focused on replicating viral dance videos from the social media platform TikTok.
He doesn't care about TikTok dances. At the time of this video, his family was being criticized for their insane parenting tactics they employed against their children. He's speaking to the school board because there's a camera there, and he gets to post it online for everyone to see how righteous he is. And now Kevin is doing the exact same thing. He's positioning himself as a martyr, a victim of Jody, while portraying himself as someone on a mission to change the system and protect children. He criticizes Jody for practicing life coaching and that coaching in general is too unregulated, but he had no problem doing it himself. Kevin and Ruby taught at conferences, did talks, and released content coaching people with no formal credentials. They had no business telling anyone how to run their life. Kevin wants the state to play the role of the father in his own household. He wants the state to step in and say, no, stop exploiting your children by following them around with a camera, posting their intimate moments online to make money so that you can live in a fancy house and take luxurious vacations and feed your narcissistic ego. The irony is, Kevin didn't need the state to step in and be the father his family needed. Kevin had thousands of people giving him feedback from all over the world. Everyone saw this coming. And if he didn't want to listen to them, he could have listened to his daughter, who had been right all along. And what's frustrating about this case is that Kevin will win his legal battles. I'm of the opinion that the court in Utah will not find a good reason to prevent Kevin from having custody of the children. And I also believe Ruby will get a much shorter sentence than Jody. We've already seen what the lead prosecutor thinks about the case. He is satisfied with Ruby's plea deal and places more of the blame on Jody. And the state didn't even attempt to poke holes in Kevin's story when they questioned him. They just used him to build a bigger case against Jody. When Shari's book releases, I can almost guarantee that Kevin will not be assigned a lot of blame. And that's okay. Kevin has the ability to come to his senses. He's made progress. It's just been painfully slow. And if I could say something to Kevin, this is what I'd say. Look, man, you fucked up. Like, you married this cute blonde girl when she was 18 years old. And I think life was pretty good. Mormon culture benefited you greatly until it didn't. And while it was good to see Chad and Shari support you recently in your government activism, what people want to see is not you defeating a broken system that you perceive has failed you. And you didn't need Child Protective Services to run your family. Your family just needed you. We wanted to see you evolve. We want to see you hate what Ruby did and who she is and was. Get on your knee and look Shari in the eye and tell her that she is more courageous than you. And you should publicly apologize to Shari for turning your back on her at the expense of your other children. You did mention how courageous R was for escaping and saving himself and his siblings.
I'm incredibly grateful for the heroics of my son in saving his life, his sister's life, and probably his other sisters and our family as well. He truly was a hero.
But I feel like it needs to be pointed out how much harder he fought against Jody than you did. You have a lot to be proud of with that daughter of yours. Remember the work trips you took her on when she used to look up to you. Remember the good times you had together with her, how proud she was of you in the past. You can return to that, but you cannot continue this victim complex. So let's answer the question I posed in the beginning of this video. Is Kevin an innocent victim or a calculating, spineless father? I think he's been both. And could continue to be both. But now, as the dust settles, Kevin faces a choice to truly own his part in this tragedy or continue to hide behind the convenient shadow of others' greater sins. The future of his children and their ability to heal may depend on which path he takes. Special thanks to Jonathan, Ms. Boom, Turner, Etmix, and Oliver for supporting me on Patreon.
On my plea deal, when I come up for probation, the prosecuting attorney will often, if they think that you're a danger to society, will talk to the probationary board and or write them a letter saying, I think she needs to stay where she is. He's going to stay neutral and not write any letter when my probation comes up, which is a really big deal. But for her, he's not going to stay neutral. So we can come up to probation and I can get off on probation and she may not.
And while the prosecutor over Ruby may have agreed not to show up at her parole hearing and advocate against her, that doesn't mean we can't. Letters may also be emailed to their office.